too. So, do you want to introduce yourself, what you do, who you are to folks that are tuning in so that way they know a little bit more about you and your work and your specialty?
Yes, I would love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie. Jackie, thanks again for inviting me to have this chat with you. My name is Katie Eggy. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in treating childhood emotional neglect, CEN for short. So I'll be referring to it as CEN just to keep it short. I see adults, individuals, couples, uh, who, and also parents who have experienced childhood emotional neglect in their past.
Mhm. I love that. I love all that you're doing with your niche specifically because I think it's so important. I think it's an area that we don't necessarily always talk about, like in therapy or just like growing up in general. And so, like, CEN, like, do you call it SEN at all for short, or is that like a no-no?
Oh, you can call it SEN, however,
Okay.
however you want.
Okay, so I'm gonna call it Sen because I'm just like it just feels right. Calling it
Sure.
Sen for me. But I think it's such a cool concept in everything that you're doing and everything that you've created. So I definitely am excited for today's live to talk a little bit about it more. And for those that are chiming in, I'm Jackie, she, her, sex therapist, a mental health counselor in Minnesota. So I work quite a bit with LGBTQ plus, trans, and gender expansive folks, BDSM, kink population. I do a lot of different things with sex therapy, all that jazz. My link is in my bio, so go check out that website if you want to know more. But we are going to kick off today's live. We're going to talk about CEN and sexuality and how they connect. And I'm just so excited with some of the information that Katie and I have talked about to share it with people that are tuning in or people that really could benefit from this. For anybody that's listening, if you feel like this is a great live, please share it with other people that you think this may be really helpful information for, or just so that they know that this information is out there. So our first question that we're going to dive into today is really for Katie. Like, what is CEN? Like, can you explain that a little bit more and like what you see in your practice in particular and kind of break it down more for some folks that may have not heard of this or don't know it that much yet?
Yes, that's a great starting question. So, childhood emotional neglect is what happens when a parent fails to sufficiently meet their child's emotional needs. The key word here, though, is sufficiently. As we all know, it's impossible to completely 100% always meet our kids' emotional needs, right? That's impossible to do. However, if more often than not, we're able to provide for their emotional needs, that is sufficient enough for for kids to develop a secure attachment and develop that trust that is needed for them to believe that someone, their caregiver, will actually be there for them when they need it. So that's how CEN can actually happen, or SEN can happen. It's actually quite common. It's something I have seen in numerous clients. I've worked in the field for 10 years, and this has been a common theme in just about every single one of my clients that I've seen. Regardless of what first brings them in for therapy, this is almost always the common thread. So a lot of times, by the time people come and see me, they are just starting to wrap their head around the concept of SEN. They've just heard about it. Dr. Janice Webb, look her up. She's the one that coined the term and has done a lot of research on this topic. So Dr. Janice Webb, she also has a couple of books if you want to check those out too. But by the time people come and see me, a lot of times people don't even realize that they have had emotional neglect because it's very insidious. It's very invisible. It's not like physical abuse, sexual abuse, even emotional abuse, where there's things that are audible, things that are physically seen and done to you that you can kind of pinpoint and be like, oh, yep, that's what happened. And that is what is contributing to my problems right now. Because it's kind of a lot of times what you didn't receive in childhood, a lot of people don't even know that was missing. And so if there's nothing there to pinpoint, oh, this is what happened to me that led to my current problems, it's really easy to just think, oh, something must be wrong with me. I'm the one that has the problem. Like that, I'm the common denominator here in all of my struggles with work, relationships, friendships, and all of those different, and parenting too. So that's the really tragic part about CEN, is that it goes undetected for a long time. So a lot of times when they do come and see me, they're really just kind of discovering, okay, so I think I have it because a lot of the symptoms match up with what I'm experiencing, but I just don't necessarily understand how it could have happened, especially for those individuals who've had really good relationships with their parents.
Ah, that's a really great point that you bring up. How, yeah. Yeah. So like even people that are pretty close with their parents or like may have some really good relationships, it still feels like it can go undetected a little bit. Like
Yeah.
sometimes with um just like emotional abuse, like neglect is a part of that. And like
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like Sen is in like that realm a little bit. It relates quite a bit to it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And then it's just like, whoa, mind boggling because it's like, wow, so this is something that maybe people are just learning because, like you're saying too, with the different types of like with physical abuse, sexual abuse, like that can be like maybe more seen, like there may be like marks on the body or there may be like different types of visceral reactions or responses, just so many different things. But with emotional neglect, that really is something where it's kind of like, okay, question mark. And then it probably feels like sometimes, like you were saying too, okay, I'm the problem, or like this is all me, when really there's some things that it feels like it could go on generationally that could be
Yes.
happening within like family systems, and then feel maybe even guilt about like, well, no, that's not abuse, or that's not neglect, or
Mm-hmm.
that's not this. And it's like, well, no, actually, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's really interesting how those different components really tie into your work quite a bit. And I love that you said you work quite a bit too with like adults and even couples and even parents. And I think it's just such a cool, like, underlying component of like individuals that may be seeking out therapy with couples and also just adults as well, and knowing a little bit more about that. Um, I love that. And I know you and I, when we were talking about this a little bit, like, well, how can CEN or CEN, like, how does that tie into sex and sexuality? And there's so many things that I know when we discussed a little bit about attachment and trust and relationships, like, there's so many added layers to it. And so I know we were going to dive into a little bit about that, like with what I've seen, like in my work a little bit, but I want to know if there's other key things of CEN that are really important for people to know or just learn about before we like jump to that.
Oh, sure. And you're right. There's so many pieces here that really tie in with sexuality and sexual health and just sexual connection with another human being, right? And that attachment piece is at the root of this, right? Um, but yes, I will say that almost every single individual that has stepped into my office has had struggles in their relationships, significant other, dating, casual relationships, even because of childhood emotional neglect. And it makes sense because if you have a difficult time connecting with yourself, you have a difficult time connecting with your emotions, you're going to have a difficult time connecting with someone else. I do strongly believe that our ability to really connect with another human being hinges upon our ability to connect with our emotions, because that is the core of who we are, right? And in your work with sexuality, I know you've seen a lot of people who just struggle with connecting with themselves, even, let alone another human being, let alone in, when it comes to sexuality and expressing that. Even if it's a loving relationship, there can be a lot of barriers to enjoying that aspect of a relationship.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, like being able to be in tune with our emotions, like as individuals, to understand them a little bit more prior to then, like, being in a relationship with others. Like, how are we going to be able to communicate that or talk about that? And I think absolutely with sex and sexuality, like, quite a bit when I work with folks that are even just going to be newly dating or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I, in the back of my mind, like therapist Jackie's like, oh my goodness, this just like screams attachment. And I have all these wonderful things I want to say right now. And it's just like, okay, slow your roll. Like, don't scare this person in session. um, don't like cut them off or anything like that. But like, make sure like you take note and come back to this because it's so important, because this idea of attachment too is a newer-ish like concept in our field. And it's been
Mm-hmm.
researched pretty heavily in the past um, however many years, like I don't even know. I remember like the monkeys and all that stuff, like bonding with their moms and all that research that I had to learn in grad school, which is important definitely as a foundation, but there's more and more and more stuff coming out. And so what I truly see with some folks, like I definitely see like the 4 different like attachment styles in my work play out in different ways. So obviously I know you probably know, but I'm just going to share with people chiming in a little bit about um, what attachment really is. It's really how we connect with other people. Our attachment style can play out within a relationship within ourselves, relationship with others, in our work, in our school, in our life, just in all these different areas. And it's something that people think attachment is really just only, it only occurs and happens when like you are born and you have your parents there, whatever. It plays out for the rest of our lives, to be honest. And so the 4 different kinds are anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. And so some things that I kind of see with, I'm going to go through these a little bit briefly, but what I see with my like anxious attachment folks, like when they're coming to meet with me for therapy and they may be doing some dating app stuff, right? Like they're ready to date again. They got this. They may put all their eggs in one basket and like may not check out all these other baskets here and just kind of like play the field for lack of better terms. Like just kind of see like, okay, do I like this person? Let me kind of feel this out a little bit. No, eggs, one basket, may become, you know, like may become very clingy to a certain person, may fear rejection, may be like, hey, why aren't you texting me back? Maybe a person that is like multiple, like texting back and forth, just like 3 or 4 times, may really feel like there is a lot of jealousy in relationships too, or anger or distrust. And so really like anxious attachment is truly like worrying about how you're being perceived by other people, but also that can play out in your relationships too. And especially like within sex and sexuality, some of the things with my anxious attachment folks that I see is they, as adults, they try to um, make up with sex for a lack of love or security that they maybe didn't have in their life. And so maybe they might be a little bit more like promiscuous. Maybe they might be having sex with multiple people and they're just kind of like giving that because they think that that's what that other person wants. Or like, this is how I'm going to have this person love me. Like, I'm going to go right in and have sex with them and then boom, they're going to be mine. And then boom, magic, fireworks. They're my spouse. They're my partner forever and ever and ever, right? This is the one. And that's just not how it necessarily goes. So those are some things that I see with my anxious folks. Like they fall in love easily. They may have negative expectations or distrust towards some people. And they may just have really negative like sexual experiences. Like they may be like, well, I had sex with this person, but like they're not calling me back or texting me back, or like we don't have any conversations about like dating or anything. So these are kind of like go, go, go a little bit of what I see in my work. And I'm like, let's kind of lower some expectations. Let's kind of take things step by step. Let's not go into anything like expecting that you go on this dating app and you're going to find like your spouse for the rest of your life. Like let's keep it real. Let's be realistic here a little bit.
Let's slow it down a bit.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of see with my anxious folks. With my avoidant folks, it's kind of the opposite. Like they don't want to fall in love. They don't want to date maybe as much. Sex is something where they're kind of like, I'm not necessarily wanting to have sex like within a long-term relationship. I might have some shorter relationships, maybe some one night stands, because like I don't want to see this person again. And so it's really short sexual encounters from what I see in my work. And avoidant attachment is more casual sex, less likely to fall in love, less involved. Honestly, there may be some self-destructive or self-sabotaging behaviors. And that may sound kind of like rough or harsh. Like, and me, I have a theory. Like, I think we all got some self-sabotaging behaviors. Like, be it unhealthy. Like, we all have them. And,
Amen. Yes.
and it's just
In our
we're
own
human.
way.
So that's just something a little bit about like this one that I just want to say. Like, no shade on like avoidant attachment or anything like that. I honestly think we all have a little bit of like self-sabotaging inside of us in one way or another, whether or not we know it. But this is something that I've just seen quite a bit. And so these might be people that are trying to have like maybe say like, oh yeah, I'm seeing this person for so much time, but we might be hooking up a little bit, but like I'm not gonna have a conversation or like go there with them. Like, no, we're good. We're not partners. Like, we're not BFGF. We're not GFGF. We're not BFBF. Right? Whatever the whole situation is. So they might just be like at an arm's length. Like, keep your distance from me, and I'll keep my distance from you. And that's really that kind of attachment style. Disorganized, a little bit different. So really feeling unworthy of love, feeling more likely to pursue casual sex, feeling like there's high in anxiety and avoidance. So this one's kind of like a mixture, a little bit of the first two. Like what I kind of see a little bit with disorganized is kind of some low self-esteem and also fear of intimacy and also kind of feeling like, well, I'm not worthy of feeling sex, or I'm not worthy of being loved, or I'm not worthy of feeling my emotions. I don't deserve this. So these are some folks that might be like emotion free, casual sex, may have um, some out of control sexual behaviors, formerly known as sexual addiction. I just don't like to use that term, but I know that that's the one that some people might know. And so this one is just, it's kind of hard because with disorganized attachment, it's really kind of a challenge a little bit, like unsure of themselves and feeling like they're teeter-tottering back and forth from some different things. And with this one too, what I've seen a little bit as well is just like that trust may be low. That trust may not be there with other people. And so I think sometimes with any attachment, depending on our upbringing and our caregiving and everything like that, if that love and that care and affection and attention was given to us, that can really, really kind of like form a roadmap a little bit to like our relationships in the future and how well we're going to be able to attach with others or not and be emotionally vulnerable. And so sometimes I've seen some folks, I've seen some men sometimes in therapy coming in where, you know, maybe their one of their primary caregivers isn't in the picture, and so then they end up like automatically thinking, okay, well, I don't trust like all women, right? Or for example, I don't trust all men because this person hasn't been in my life. I am not going to put myself out there. Like, you get three strikes with me when you're out. And so sometimes I can kind of see that as the avoidant. But then I can also see the ones where it's kind of like, well, because I didn't have this caregiver in my life, I'm like trying to find that love. Like, please love me because my parent didn't love me. And so when I'm dating, I'm really trying to latch on. And so there's also that kind of anxiety in it too. And so I see so many ways that like trust and attachment and CEN can just like all tie together. And it's just so interesting. And with secure attachment, right? I'll just go over this one. This one is really affectionate. You might seek long-term relationships, less likely to engage in casual sex. Like, your confidence might just be there and it's there, and you may have really good self-esteem. Like, you're not cocky or arrogant or anything like that. You just don't have reasons to distrust people. Like, you may not, you're not on edge. Like, you trust your partner or your spouse or whoever you might be dating in your relationships. You probably seek more long-term relationships than anything like that. You enjoy sex, you're comfortable with intimacy, whereas some of the other attachment styles may not be. And there's really just fewer doubts. And the secure attachment type just really prefers like being in that committed relationship long-term. Um, and so those are kind of the four different styles. And it's just so interesting when thinking about all this, how sexuality and CEN definitely tying together. So I just went off on a tangent, Katie. Like, what are
No,
your
no, that's
thoughts
no,
on
I
all
love
of
how
that?
it's important to break that down because sometimes those attachment styles can be a little confusing. I know there's a lot of ambiguity between a couple of them, and it can seem like, okay, am I this style or that style? Fundamentally, looking at attachment styles all stem from kind of like that upbringing and how we are treated as we're growing up. And for secure attachment to happen, we need to feel safe. We need to feel soothed, and that's the primary one where I think things go wrong and where CEN is for CEN can really kind of enter into the picture. So feeling safe is so important, feeling soothed, but you also need to feel seen That's another area that sometimes goes to the wayside. And also secure. Those are the four things that are really necessary in order for secure attachment to take hold. But the two things I want to kind of mention right now, the soothe and the seen, and those actually require parents to do pretty specific things, including validation of feelings, naming of emotions. Emotional intelligence always starts with building emotional vocabulary. So mirroring, co-regulation is so important, like we were talking about earlier. That piece of co-regulation is a lifelong attachment need, actually. And a lot of people sometimes get that, that being needy and attached and needing to attach to a caregiver as being a bad thing. And it's not. And if we're not, but we always seek out our caregivers in order for us to feel soothed through that co-regulation piece and to feel seen. And if that kind of stops after a little while, maybe you turn two and parents are thinking you should be able to calm down yourself, you should be able to think logically, even when you're not even remotely developmentally capable of doing that. There's just a lot of misinformation out there on what babies, toddlers, and little kids can actually do fundamentally, developmentally, and cognitively. So I think that is one of the bigger contributing factors to why CEN still happens to this day. And it's going to be happening for quite a while just because of the conflicting message that parents get and over inundation of information anyway for parents, right? But if you're not feeling seen, you have a hard time developing a sense of self. And that requires certain type of attention and attunement from caregivers. If that's not necessarily given in certain ways, then it's really hard to know who you are. It's really hard then in a relationship to identify, what do I like? What don't I like? What sort of touch, especially in intimacy, what sort of touch feels good to me? What doesn't feel good to me? And do I have a strong enough sense of self-confidence where I can actually speak up to my partner or whoever I'm with to say, hey, you know what? Can we try it this way? I would rather have it this way. Ooh, I love that. Keep going, right? Like that kind of communication, I'm sure you work with a lot of your clients on how to even just identify what it is that you like, what you enjoy, what you'd like to try. And then also then how do you convey that effectively to whoever you're with? So, I mean, I was actually kind of curious, kind of how you work with these people that you see and kind of get them toward that place where they're connecting with themselves, their body, their emotions, and they're taking that information that our emotions give us, understanding it, translating it, and then expressing it to improve their whole relationship. I mean, how do you work with that?
Mm-hmm. That is such a great question. So there's a lot of different things that I really have to do. One of the things in particular, with some of my couples, so sometimes, we have our defense mechanisms too, as like humans, and I promise I have a point with this. Sometimes we project our previous partner, what they're doing, onto our new partner or our spouse. And so that's one of the things that individually I'll sometimes have to work with my couples and say, like, hey, we need to get this shit together. Like, this person is not your ex, so how do we move forward with this? Because we have to work with this individually to before then be able to like work on that co-regulation piece with couples. And so really a lot of the time, sometimes it's like a balance of like couples therapy and individual work. Like it's a both and I think that that can be some of the most important pieces of it too, because then it's kind of like being able to work on some of that attachment components of it and talk to these individuals about their different attachment styles and being very aware of that and being mindful of that. If one person has an anxious attachment, right, and they may want to cling to their partner right away, and this other partner, right, they have an avoidant attachment and they want to run and leave, like this person, and then if this person does that, right, and isn't clinging, this person feels abandoned. And then if this other person is like, well, why aren't we like talking about this, right? Like we need to work around a way if we're having a conflict or something to at least communicate and say like, hey, we are coming back to this later. Like we need a timeout. We need to put a pause on this. Let's both go our separate ways a little bit. And so for me, I really focus on self-soothing for my individuals first. and then to be able to focus on that a little bit more within the couple's space and with that co-regulation piece a little bit. So I kind of break them up. Like, hey, we're not coming to couples therapy to fight. Like, y'all don't want to fight here while we're meeting. Like, we're
Yeah.
coming here to resolve, right?
Yeah. We can do that.
Um, and that fighting is helpful to see. Like, that conflict is helpful to see, though, to see, like, well, how do they manage it? What do they do? And if you have two avoiders, it's kind of like, oh gosh, well, how do we kind of work on this to make it a little bit more of like that assertiveness between the two of them, and to make it a little bit more stronger bond component and that secure attachment to each other, so they both don't feel like they're running away from one another. So I'll kind of break them up a little bit. I'll make sure that we're not projecting things from like past to the present. I'll call that shit out in therapy because that's just what I do. And a lot of the times partners really do appreciate that. They're like, thank you for saying that, because this is something, a dynamic of our relationship that has happened for a while, and it's not me, it's their ex. And so that's a part of it that I want to be very mindful of when talking about some of this couples work, is kind of that spillover of relationships. But then that also leads back into like, okay, well, what was the relationship like with your family growing up? Have you ever been told I love you? Were you ever hugged? Were you ever held as a baby? I know you and I were talking about the cry it out method earlier, and Katie's being very like nice about this. I'm like, ah, please stop using the cry it out method, y'all. Like, babies can't self-soothe. They need like their parents' heartbeat, their right to right brain with the person that carried the baby. Like, that is co-regulation. So even when we're doing the cry it out method, like, that is changing and altering their attachment style to caregivers. So like the baby, they need you. Like, it doesn't just work. Babies don't know how to self-soothe. Okay, so back to this. So going back to that, like, even was the cry it out method used? So I'll kind of dig a little bit for like some of those really early on components of family relationships. Like that secure attachment, was it ever there? Was it ever with anybody? Is there someone that you feel like you can just even trust in your life too? And so I kind of dive in a little bit individually with both of them, with co-regulation and with touch and intimacy, right? Like physical touch, like, right, and sex and sexuality. That's something that is so important. Like, so we need to work on just small things in our couples work. So sometimes I'll just have like one partner, put hand on their other partner's heart and like kind of go like this or whatever, right? And we'll just kind of breathe for a couple minutes at the beginning of session, even if it's like 3, even if it's like 1, if they don't want to do it for a long time. We'll just kind of take that time to get grounded sometimes, to be able to help co-regulate and use their heartbeats one another, where they're mirroring that right brain to right brain and signifying it. So it's really important that they're sitting in a certain way too. And to even use some different things within that. Sometimes I like to be able to use some validation, right? So sometimes I'll use that with couples at the beginning of session if they like to be able to do it. I'm all about rituals, so someone will be like, we want beginning and end. And so sometimes I'll have them do it again at the end to wind down, and kind of talking about, well, what do we appreciate about your partner in today's session? What are some key things that you want to validate them for? How do we tune into this a little bit? And to know that even if there's been a really tough session, we still do it. Like, we're still going to do that. Like, we're not going to not practice validating one another, and not practice like still trying to co-regulate one another, even though we may be feeling like we're flooded with all these different emotions. And sometimes this can also get into like love languages and like previous, if there's ever been like previous trauma or whatever, and specifically like sexual trauma. And let's say like one partner's love language is physical touch, and the other is like acts of service, like you doing stuff for me, and like their last one is physical touch because of potentially sexual trauma. We start slow with that, and we talk a little bit about like, how are there ways, if your partner wants to be able to have physical touch, like what are the things that you're comfortable with, not comfortable with, always bringing up consent too. And sometimes it's as small as just like putting a hand on top of one another in session, or lightly just like having that person like softly touch them and knowing that they're safe, and even just noticing and like regulating themselves into the room, into the space that they're in, and just kind of slowing it down. With sexual intimacy, I think really what's important, the key part, and you kind of said it earlier too, Katie, just like being able to talk to your partners about like, oh yes, this feels good, or this isn't so great, or like whatever. And it's really just kind of about like doing some different things to rebuild like that emotional intelligence within the relationship, to then be able to build your confidence with that person in the relationship, to be able to trust them, and vice versa, do the other trust, like two-way street here, to then to be able to connect. Because if you don't trust a person, you're not going to go have sex with them if you're in a relationship. And maybe you will, I don't know, like most people, I'm guessing that's probably not, like just depends on the person, right? But most of the time when there's a lot of different attachment styles that are coming in, trust is a huge one and a big component with it too, and intimacy. So for me, like it's really about breaking it down a little bit. It's not rushing that process at all, because I want my couples to feel safe, like not only with their partners, but with me as a therapist, with the work I'm doing with them. Um, and I check in with them on that. I say, like, hey, if we're moving too fast, please tell me. Like, I would rather, if it's like, Jackie, we're hitting the accelerator and we're just boom, we're going and we're zooming, right? And we need to like pump the brakes here, tell me. Or if like we're too much on the brakes and you want to pump the accelerator, boom, just tell me. So those are some things that I try to implement and incorporate. And a lot of the times too, it's a lot of relaxation. And there's a great book that came out recently. I haven't read it. I've skimmed it or parts of it when I'm just like, ooh, I want to look at this, right? It's called Better Sex Through Mindfulness. And it really talks about new research within the past couple of years that's come out based around like relaxation techniques before having sex. And sometimes I see that quite a bit, like with those anxious attachers again, or just performance anxiety or anxiety like with our bodies before we have sex or anything like that. Sometimes we need to do that self-soothing beforehand, or sometimes we need to focus on mindfulness-based practices. And I'm not saying like go meditate for an hour as foreplay. No, like do something that's going to help you personally to feel relaxed, so then you can connect sexually and intimately with your partner and have it be an enjoyable, pleasurable, consensual experience, versus something where you're going to be completely anxious, not going to be able to enjoy it, and sex is going to be off the table then. So that's a long-winded answer.
I love it. It's very thorough, and it makes sense. There's a lot of parallels with the work that you do and the work I do, just because there is that huge intersection between sex, sexuality, showing how you show up in your romantic relationships too. Like I said, all the couples that I work with, or even individuals who are in relationships, I've never met one who has not struggled in this intimacy area. And I know I wanted to kind of piggyback off on something you had said about the validation piece and how important that is, and how to create more opportunities for that. I would venture to say that most people actually do not know how to validate very well. It's something our society just is really sucky at, to, clinical terms. It's just really, they're really not good at it. A lot of times people think they are validating, but they're not. And like reassurance is one. And if you really understand how detrimental invalidation is, and how important validation is to healthy emotional development, I think more people can understand, like, oh, I can understand why I am struggling right now with emotion, and I can understand better how I was emotionally invalidated. I have often a lot of clients who come to me and say, I had such a great relationship. One of the first questions I ask is, describe your childhood in the first 3 words that come to mind. And most of them, not most, I would say a good number, are able to say, oh, it was fine, it was good, nothing great. I mean, we had some good times. But some even say, oh, it was fantastic. Great memories. We went on lots of trips. We did a lot of stuff. I was close with my mom. I got along with people. But then when you really start to dig in, because that's what I do, I dig. Very academic approach here. Just kind of like what you do, dig into those family systems. And I actually start to look at, like, how did people respond to you in key emotional moments? And a lot of times what parents think they're doing that is helpful. And again, not parent bashing here. I'm a parent myself. Parenting is effing hard.
Oh yeah, it's fucking hard.
And
yep.
It is.
Yep. But
sometimes you're just at your wit's end, and you're just trying to get through the day. So I get that. And also our society is very unsupportive in this arena. But if you're asking these questions of how did my parents respond to me generally growing up, a lot of times I always hear responses like, oh, well, they tried to, help me come up with ideas on how to fix it. Or they were saying, oh, you got this. Like that report that you have to do in front of your class, you've been practicing, you got it. You're going to be so good. So reassurance, there's a lot of, oh, don't cry, don't worry, telling people how to feel. Or another really common one is kind of like the comparison thing. Like they share about a story when, your teenager comes home and says, oh my gosh, the person that I wanted to ask to the dance said no, I feel awful now, I feel so sad. And then mom steps in, really well intentioned and says, oh, you know what, the same thing happened to me when I was your age. And that's actually, in those moments, those are actually all forms of invalidation. Most people don't know that though. But the brain perceives any sort of invalidation as a psychological threat, just as it sees physical abuse. I mean, you might as well have slapped your daughter across the face. The brain would respond to that the exact same way. So people, I don't think, really fully grasp how detrimental it is to invalidate your child's feelings and experiences. And this is why CEN is so common. Because even in the best, loving, well-intentioned homes, a lot of these comments are just mainstream. I mean, you go out to the park, your kid, just the other day, a kid was kind of scared going down the slide. And she was probably like 7 or 8. My 2-year-old, or my 1.5-year-old was, looking at this girl like, why don't you just go down the slide? Because she wanted to go down the slide. But anyway, this like 6, 7-year-old girl was standing at the top of the slide. Her dad was down below, and super engaged dad. And she was like, oh, you could tell she was anxious about going down the slide. And the dad was encouraging her, reassuring, oh, you got this, you can do it, I know you can totally do it. And she kept going, kind of pacing back and forth, really unsure. Eventually she ended up not going down the slide. She just kind of took the stairs down. But the whole time, I'm thinking, okay, so the dad is super loving, obviously. He really wants her to try to go down, and she probably could have, but in that moment, emotion got the best of her and she was too scared and too anxious to go down. I'm wondering in that moment, if that's a common scenario and the common response from a parent is kind of dismissing the feeling and saying, oh, don't worry, you're fine, it's not that scary, you totally got this. That can actually do a number to our own sense of feeling confident. Because if you can't trust your feelings, you can't trust yourself. Yeah. And then as you get older, if that's the common way that you kind of see yourself, like, well, I have to rely on what other people think and feel about a situation because I can't trust my own judgment and how I feel about it. And I'm just kind of blocking that ability to connect with my own feelings because it's happened so often. Then imagine how that shows up then in a significant other relationship where you're, going through all the motions. You've had 3 kids even. So obviously you've done the deed at least 3 times, right?
Yep.
At the same time though, even in that, is it satisfactory? Are you even engaged? Are you even connected with the person you are being intimate with? Chances are you're probably not. And you're sure as hell not enjoying it if there is this block between you and your emotions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think absolutely like what you're saying, that is so important. It just makes me think about like when people are saying like, don't cry, it's okay or whatever. And it's like, no, if a person's gonna cry, they're gonna cry. Like let them cry. Why do they have to hold back their tears to make you comfortable? Like sometimes that emotional release can be the thing that you need, or it's just so healing. And it's like, let's not tell people to not like trust their emotions, like you were saying. And the thing about validation too, I love that you've been doing like the validation reels lately because I'm like, yes, like we need more of this. And I remember even saying that, like how we sometimes as humans, we can suck at validating one another
and not know it.
And I see it with my couples quite a bit. And sometimes I'll joke with them, like, have you ever seen like Forgetting Sarah Marshall? And have you ever seen the scene where like he's on the surfboard and Paul Rudd is like telling him, nope, try it again, or nope, too much, or nope, that didn't fit. I'm like, literally, this is what that feels like. Nope, try again. Like, nope, did you feel validated? Was that nope. another one. And then it's really hard when you get people that are like, well, I don't really care. I don't think we care about validating one another. And then I'm
Yeah.
just kind of like, well, then what are we doing here? Like, we want something to be better, and
Right.
validation and being there for a partner is just so important. And like, yes, if we've learned that as a child or at like a young age, like ways to invalidate or ways to not trust our feelings, that can totally play out in the relationships too. And I think um, I'm referring a lot to a lot of my clients that are dating. Like, some of them may want to try and make a bad thing work versus
Mm-hmm.
saying like, no, I actually need to trust this, that this may not be right for me, and just listen to those feelings and trust my intuition. And so I think it's important that feelings are there for a reason, and
Yes.
they do tell us things, and they're so important to be in tune with overall. So I just love that you said all those different things. But yeah, yeah, so much different good stuff that we've kind of covered today in this live. And with our two kind of niches coming together, they totally mesh
Yeah.
really well with a lot of things. And so I just want to ask if there's anything that we didn't get to that you want to talk about, just looking at the time and everything with our live. Was there anything else that you're like, we need to just briefly talk about this or chime in?
Okay, well, of course I could go on and on and on about this stuff. This is a huge passion of mine, but, to respect time and everything, I think that covered a lot of the main components and kind of really focused on the intersection of Zen and sexuality and sexual relationships. So I think that's good for now, unless there's anything you want to add.
No, I really loved being able to do this and being able to talk to you about it. I know that we kind of planned a little bit for this, but I just love like all the different areas that we discussed and the
Mm-hmm.
connections of them because they're so important. And I think, um, and when we were talking a little bit about like doing these lives, I think that's just one of the most important things is just talking about all these different key areas of mental health
Mm-hmm.
and like opening up these conversations. And so, um, if a client were to say, like, hey, Katie, I'm not sure about like seeing you for Sen, like, this is something that's come out in my life quite a bit and I'm noticing it. Like, what would you tell that client? I'm just wondering about that. Like, would you just be like, do it? Like, I can help you with it. Like, what would you say to
Yeah,
those folks listening in that may be thinking that?
I think I would, well, I would just tell them that if that's something you want to explore, I'd be happy to do that with them. It is tricky to kind of identify whether or not you've had that, just like I had said in the beginning, just because the symptoms are really insidious. And oftentimes people have so many different struggles in seemingly different aspects of their life. Maybe it's work, maybe this particular relationship, and then maybe a family thing. And it just seems so disconnected that it may seem like it's not really sin, right? But realistically, well, what I have seen that having childhood emotional neglect actually does manifest itself as struggles in a myriad of different areas. And so there is a really strong connection point. And so if you can kind of get to the emotional neglect aspect of it, kind of like the root of it all, then it actually does impact a lot of change and positive change in all these other aspects of your life too. So there is hope. It doesn't, it's not like you have to just especially go to one therapist for one thing, one therapist for another. Although if you are struggling with sexual addiction, that is not my area. Definitely go see Jenny for that. That's her jam, and she's an expert at that. And I will refer you to that. But I just want also people to know that if you're kind of thinking about maybe this is me, you're not alone. It's not your fault either. And there is a way to kind of work through that. So there is hope.
Got chills when you said that. I love it. Well, share one last time, like how people can follow you, like your Instagram, website, like whatever you want to be able to share with folks listening in.
Okay. So you can follow me on Connect Therapy MN on Instagram. I also have a Facebook page that you can kind of see updates and posts. Every once in a while, I do workshops on emotional intelligence. It's particularly hitting that emotional validation piece of it because it's so big. And yeah, you can always email me. My website is connecttherapymn.com. I provide therapy plus coaching for those who are interested in having some treatment for CEN. So those are always good ways to find me.
Awesome. Well, definitely go follow her, y'all, if you don't. She's awesome. So many wonderful things that she's coming out with, and I just love being able to connect with her and to be able to connect with you on this live. Thank you so much for doing this with me. For anybody, again, who y'all think who you tuned in and you think somebody else can benefit from listening to this conversation, please share that with them. I'm sure Katie and I'm guessing, I don't know, I'm assuming I would love that. I'm guessing Katie would love that too, to just listen in on what we're talking about today here. So thank you again, Katie, for joining with me. And everybody else, I hope if you're listening in, you stay shameless and you have a great rest of your day out there. Take care.
Thank you, Jackie.